Welcome. So I'm really pleased to share the stage today with Henry Hobson. He is from the UK. He was born, as he says, a stone's throw from Stonehenge, which is interesting in and of itself, and trained at the Royal College of Arts as a graphic designer. He's worked at design houses such as Prologue and Why Not Associates, where he's designed title sequences for films including Rango, Sherlock Holmes, Fright Night, The Walking Dead, The Help, Tree of Life, and The Hangover Part 2, a varied body of work, some of which we'll be talking about today. He now runs Bootmaker Films, a company that's produced title sequences for films and animated sequences for the Oscars, and recently the opening sequences for a Sony game called The Last of Us. He's currently in post-production on his first feature film called Maggie, which is starring Arnold Schwarzenegger and Abigail Breslin, which sounds fascinating. And he's here today to talk about some of his work. So please help me in welcoming Henry.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
We're done that part now. So, like we've mentioned, we're going to be talking about your work today, but I want to start by talking a little bit about how you got to where you are today, because I think one of the interesting things in speaking to people such as yourself is the journey that you've taken to get to have a resume that includes such incredible work. Tell us a bit about how you started in your current field in graphic design.
Well, actually, graphic design was a mistake. I wanted to work in film. I wanted to make films, obsessed by commercials and music videos. And in speaking to people, they all said, "You're not going to get it in England. You're not going to get into the film world without either knowing somebody or having enough money to go and do it. So study something else. Go and study physics, anything." And graphic design became just another avenue, and I started on it and realized, okay, you can tell kind of stories within frames and start to bring to life elements. And I was working at a company called Why Not Associates in London before and after I went to the Royal College of Art, and they were a company that enabled me to design stamps one week, sculptures the next week, and then make commercials and short animated projects the week after. And what that did is that enabled me to really build up that kind of confidence, the ability to kind of understand the techniques, the processes, technologies, alongside helping build the concepts and the projects from there. So with that, a few projects came in. There was some stuff for the BBC that enabled me to get noticed in the States, and I was pulled over to work with Prologue, and very excited to work at a company whose track record of title sequences was enormous, and feeling being part of that family, and so that enabled me to kind of start the career almost in film, working on the peripherals.
When you wanted to be a filmmaker before you started in graphic design, and someone said to you, study anything, but did you have a sense of what graphic design would offer? Did you have a proclivity for art? People come to film from a whole variety of different areas. What was your sort of initial expectation, and how did that change?
Well, I knew what looked good. I thought I knew what looked good, and I knew how to kind of put that together. I didn't feel like I was the best illustrator. At school you're taught you have to be able to draw a green pepper and a milk bottle, and
very valuable skills.
The person who does that best is going to be the best artist. Obviously, but I took upon myself. I like materials. I was experimenting with stuff. I remember taking bits of metal down to an X-ray machine and X-raying all these kind of shards of metal and doing like weird practical things, and I felt that there's a different avenue to be taken there, and so I certainly felt that that there was a way in which you could start to tell the kind of stories there, and the principal thing with that is, someone turned around and said, well, look at who are your heroes. Well, I'd love to make films like Ridley Scott. Well, he started out as a graphic designer. Alfred Hitchcock, apparently, according to some spurious internet research I did a couple of weeks ago, started work doing title design for Paramount Pictures back when he was working. And then obviously Mike Mills recently, Beginners and Thumbsucker. And so it was, and that was still after I made the decision to do it. But there's a track record of people doing it, and I thought, this might work. My dastardly plan might work.
You said graphic design allowed you to do work that was almost like filmmaking. With that long-term goal in mind, were there decisions that you made earlier in your career or continuing in your career that sort of helped you get even closer and closer to that prize? Like was there a grand plan or an orchestration of how you chose work with that goal in mind?
To an extent. It sounds so. Early on, I learned as much as I could, the technology as much as I could, and it wasn't, in English schools there aren't that many, in English universities the resources aren't that heavy and aren't that kind of, they don't have that, at least in my time they didn't have that much. So the idea was like, get it while you can, learn as much while you can. And so knowing that technology allowed me to kind of have some shortcuts. And then having the conceptual background from the Royal College of Art allowed me to kind of combine the two. So I was able to solve a problem knowing how I could solve it. And then because of that, I was able to kind of really just jump through, get ahead of some of my peers and be able to understand, okay, here it is. I'm going to specialize in motion graphics. Because I can see there's at least an area where you're creating something, and I really want to make title sequences. I really was dying to make a title sequence, and in England there's barely any. There's a couple of post-production houses, big post-production houses where you can do that. So I started making animated commercials with Why Not Associates, and that was not deliberate, but I knew that if I was making stuff like that, I could then progress on to show people that I could do the kind of titles work, which it did, and which enabled me to kind of transition out to America and start work. And in that realm, I was working with title sequences and commercials, and I would pitch frequently live action solutions to graphic design problems, and eventually Sony picked up on it and said, yeah, let's go for it. Let's take a risk, even though you've barely done any live action directing before. And I did a few short films, which were, low budget, but paid for by a company. And that was the kind of the break, which enabled me to now be in the final stages of having directed my first film with Arnold Schwarzenegger, which is insane. Yeah.
On so many levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's dramatic film too,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, it's pure drama. There's barely any I don't want to say that, it's going to do the film down. It's tons of action. But it's filled with action.
No. It's a
drama.
Zombie film.
It's a dramatic zombie film. It's about the last. It's about 8 weeks in the life of a girl who's infected with the zombie virus, and it's a slow progressing virus as opposed to the World War Z, the Dawn of the Dead, the kind of fast, like you're bitten, you're infected, you go. This one, she was bitten, you don't see her get bitten. I'm not giving any, I've got to be so careful of what I give away. You don't see her get bitten, and then the story's about how the family reacts to that and how they deal with her at home and that interaction. And Arnold plays the father for me, I think one of the most amazing performances I've ever seen him do. And I'm an Arnold fan. I'm sure most people have a favorite Arnold film, but he was really stepped up to the plate and gave it his all. And you can just see how professional he is and how immersed in every decision he makes. And Maggie was certainly one where he really gave it all.
So this film is a living example of your sort of initial goal to use, graphic design as a way to film. You said a minute ago that you, when you came to the US, you started doing a lot more title design, and you said that you were really dying to get a title job. What was it about titles? What do they do creatively? For someone as yourself, what kind of opportunities do they afford creatively, and how did they help in the furthering of your career?
I think everyone here would probably, agree with the sentiment of like title design. I don't know what it is, but it has this kind of attraction to it, where you're part of a film, and you've also, in some ways, you've got a freedom. There's also a heritage of some great title designers who've gone before, who've had the ability to tell these kind of often quite varied stories, like diverse from the film. Whether it's like Saul Bass, and he's like showing North by Northwest, and it's just these kind of graphic lines, a really powerful score, and I think there's an attraction to being part of the film world, but also being able to tell your own story, or at least give a spin on a story. And a director's coming to you and saying, "I want to do this to the film, and show me a way in which I can take that further, or show more, or just show me something new." And I think although the new is becoming less and less, there's still a desire for the title sequence to set up the story, to give the audience something to really kind of feel with the story is going to be exciting or different. I think there's an innate attraction to it for the design community. And certainly it was always on this pedestal in the UK, and I think in the UK, still kind of bizarrely, the film is always on a pedestal in the UK, and so I think there's an attraction there, and because it's so unattainable, that's the added.
And you get the opportunity to work directly with filmmakers.
Yeah, and that's that was one of the best, like in each of the journeys, like going to college, working with Why Not, Prologue, but then if you're working on a film title sequence, you're working with Ridley Scott for like 2 months in a room with him, in a dark room with him, or you're working with Gore Verbinski 2 months in a dark at the end of the film. So they've been working on it for years, and so you're learning everything that they went through, every decision they made, and you're seeing all these different characteristics, all these different personalities. Like Ridley, if you see him work, he is immediate, so quick with decisions, like absolutely visceral gut reactions. It's like, make that more green, move that over there, shift that over there, okay, next shot. Do that, next shot. And also comes in knowing exactly what he wants beforehand, possibly because of the design background, but I think just more an innate talent in that field. Gore is just very trusting and very open. Just show me what you want. Here's the brief, and just show me from there. And some other directors want to show me everything. Show me 10 different things, and I'll pick from the buffet of design. And then others will ask everybody else's opinions, and it's kind of the ultimate film school. By working with like all these directors, you're able to kind of see the different ways in which they manage jobs themselves, the work, and it really is was an amazing experience having each one of those. Like you'd have a couple of months you'd work on like Robin Hood, a couple of months you'd work on Rango. Sherlock Holmes, I didn't have that much interaction with Guy Ritchie. Me and Simon, who were the two designers on it, were at a distance there, but you still had that. You could still see from Guy that he was very distinct with what he wanted. After having gone through revision after revision, Frank Darabont as well was very distinct that he wanted something particular and was wanting to push for that. So yeah, there is a very strong desire from a very strong set of skills from these people that I was able to learn from and use when transitioning to directing myself. Mm-hmm. And now I'm, people who work on my projects, I'm hideous to. No, I did have a moment where on the film, it's like, who's going to design the title? And I'm like, well, I really want to do it myself, but I've got no time at all. And I really want, and then so, but in the end, I looked at the film and realized I can't have one anyway. It would be too much for this film.
Well, that's interesting. I mean, before we get to show the work, a lot of the work that we have here are, in fact, end titles. And, you know, we talked a little bit before this about the shift from the necessity or the purpose of having a opening title versus an end title. Can you talk about those distinctions a little?
So, as a filmmaker, all the filmmakers look at their films and go, okay, well, I want to initiate the world. You know, with any zombie film, that the world comes in and you have a news report and you have flashing images, and that's the trope that has been created and that still works. I still am put in the mood because I know that world and I understand the language that's being used, and I love that it's been done differently, and there's been some great zombie title sequences over the past couple of years, but still, the opening titles set up the world, give you a bit of insight into, here are the characters, here's what you're going to see, or here is what's going to happen, or here's a bit of a flavor. Like the 7 sequence tells you exactly what's going to happen. It's not spelling it out, but it's visually giving you every clue. And now end titles are because people want to have a title sequence, but they don't want to set up the mood at the beginning. So you get directors coming along going, I've always wanted a title sequence. I was obsessed with Saul Bass, with Carl Cooper, with whomever, and I really want a title sequence, but I don't want to ruin the beginning of my film with like some big setup that may not be necessary on a film. And so they want the end of the film, and I think it's a nice way of recapping or telling a bit of the story, but they're two different challenges, because at the end of the film, you're retelling or bringing about some kind of previous experience, or emotively recapping things within the film, or feelings or moods. And at the beginning, you're given a clue what's going to be happening. So I think it's a different skill set, and I think there's two different kind. And like the sequences we'll be showing. I think the London Boulevard. I think we're showing the opening title, and Walking Dead opening. And I think they go a long way to kind of kick in the mood, and you can be a lot more kind of atmospheric with that. Whereas the end titles, you can use more from the film. You don't have to hide any story elements back, because you found it out. You found all the twists and turns and secrets by that point.
Well, let's start with one. The first piece that we're going to show is one of your newer pieces. It's for Snow White, and it is an end title. Before we show the clip, could you just give us a little bit of a quick setup of what we're going to be seeing here, and kind of, what's interesting and significant about it? So
Rupert Sanders, who's actually a graphic designer, but he studied at the Central St Martin's, part of the University of the Arts, London. Same as myself. I was at the LCP, a different branch of the same college. So we shared the same type tutors. I mean, he's slightly older, but we still like shared stories about like different kind of tutors we had. And he wanted a sequence that recapped the film, but in a new light. And you could tell that there were moments in the film where he really wanted to kind of, I know his DP, and I know that he'd really love to get those kind of tight, detailed, dirty macro shots. And so he wanted, and there was a few different routes. There was different ice and plants, and there was like overlays of different people that has a similar vibe to the kind of True Detective thing. And then we settled on a route that played with the battle sequence and immersing yourself in the middle of the battle, rather than taking that classic cinematic battle viewpoint from 1,000 yards away, looking at the kind of huge armies. This is inside the battle for the entirety of the sequence. Great piece of score by Florence and the Machine. So it's just tight, dirty, detail shots showing the fight, the kind of triumphant fight of good versus evil. Wanted to kind of bring out the all those kind of beautiful costumes that were created, beautiful set pieces. So it's a nice combination of practical and CG. Some of the backgrounds are kind of popped in post to really kind of sell the depth of the world.
Okay, let's leave it at that, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about it. Can we roll the Snow White piece, please? So was there a particular aspect of that film that informed the decision to do this macro battle scene? Was there a point of inspiration for that?
Yeah, I mean, with Rupert's visual style, he built this great way in which the bad guys have these kind of shattering onyx shards that come out versus in this kind of invincible army that you keep chopping down and they always come back. And but yet in the film, again, it just happens in this kind of big scale of like these huge sweeping shard armies that form, and nothing had really been kind of in tight, seeing every tiny little bit of detail. So what was the most kind of the biggest part that Rupert really wanted to put forward was, let's show that detail, let's have some fun with it. And it was, you know, the nicest thing at the end of it was the DP of it, of the main film, came in at the end and was like, I wish I'd shot that piece, which is the end titles, because you know that and I'm one of his biggest fans. I think Greg Fraser's just about to do the new Star Wars, the Gareth Edwards Star Wars film, and he's one of the best DPs working in the business right now, and so that was this like great moment. It's like, yeah, okay, now I've got the bit that he wanted to have shot, and it's because that was the bit he was never allowed to do on the day.
Sure.
So that was quite a nice thing. So you could see that everyone was really wanted to tell that other side of the battle, but there's no place in the film for it before that point.
And you said it was all shot practically, right?
Yeah.
So you have an interesting story about working with animals.
Yeah. So the animal in that is the rook, and I didn't realize it comes on set, and I thought, oh, this is just going to be this like squawky bird, but I didn't realize they're practically like cats. You can sit there stroking it. It sits there, you know, you can feed it food, and it's just this really lovely creature that acts on demand. I mean, it was easier to work with than the actor who was swinging the sword around.
So Edgar Allan Poe sold us the bill of goods on that whole crow thing, right?
Yeah. No, they're hideously. I didn't realize how smart those creatures are. They're really, really smart. The trainer was telling us stories about how they know that if they take a nut out to the middle of a zebra crossing or a pedestrian crossing, and they put it in there, and they walk across, and then they wait for the car to come and run it over, they can go back and take the food out from underneath there. And so you could see how easily. So that's it from now on. No more actors. Just going to work with.
You have one of the only good animal stories, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move on to the next one, ironically, about animals, though this time animated. We're going to show the end titles for Rango, which was directed by Gore Verbinski. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about the brief or the direction for this one?
So Gore was he'd seen London Boulevard, which is show later, and he wanted something colourful, vibrant, this big kind of graphic, almost nostalgic, you know, looking back to the old kind of Pink Panther title sequences. He wanted something that was fun, that recaptured all the energy and playfulness of the film. It was about as far from my, you know, a lot of the work I've done before and since is quite dark and depressing, and this was the furthest I've ever gone in terms of lightness and happiness. I say with a kind of depressed look. And yeah, but Gore wanted something, you know, the film was like, and if you haven't seen it at the movie theater, it's so beautiful. Like the animation in the actual film itself, it had a cinematographer, which is very rare for an animated film. It was the DP was Roger Deakins, and Gore was saying how Roger would come in and would position cameras and lights in the scenes, and you can see every scene feels like it's lit like a proper film. And so Gore wanted the antithesis of that. He wanted this kind of lo-fi, handmade technique. So it's all the kind of practical, not all practical, there's lots of computer-drawn elements, but a lot of the stuff and the techniques and transitions are done with practical ink, practical kind of textures and stuff. And all the characters are drawn, you know, with these kind of scale-like patterns overlaid with lots. So it's got lots and lots of practical layers on top of the more kind of vector-based style. So yeah, it's a journey that Rango takes back through the film, recapturing some of the kind of fun moments that he's been on. It's yeah,
Okay,
it's the most fun sequence I've worked on. In inverted commas. Yeah.
You sound so animated when you say that.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's see the Rango piece, please. So, so anyone who's seen the film will be familiar with the owls and sort of their little comedic foil role in the movie. They're important here, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things when the designs were first put forward, and I showed Gore, he was in love with the color palette, in love with the kind of, we can tell all these stories and it's going to be so much fun, and the color's such a strong, vibrant part of the film. And then we were kind of riffing off this idea, he's got these owls which bookend the film, and they come up in these kind of old school Western style moments of just kind of retelling parts of the story. And it was like, how can we kind of abuse them a little more and use them in fun ways? So the brief that came out of it, which is with the cool song, the kind of hark back to the kind of Dick Dale and the Deltones, Mirror Salou, Pulp Fiction kind of score that's in there. He wanted to, so the start of it, so all the way through, the owls are recapping famous rock moments, and that was his kind of the little thing that we came up with to really have some fun with, like embed in little secret elements and little hidden things that you can watch again and again until you're like completely tired of having too much fun. And so you watch back, and there's like the Jimi Hendrix burning his guitar. There's Pete Townsend smashing it, pushing the guitar through the speakers. There's the kind of windmill, the Angus Young sliding on his knees. At the beginning is a complete replication of the opening Mirror Salou, like slide down the neck of the guitar. And so yeah, it's those kind of things where you're allowed to have some fun and bring in these extra story elements that no one's really going to notice. The one that never made it was a really fun one, which was, if anyone knows the Bob Dylan, I can't remember the name of the song now, where he's holding up the cards and just dropping them for each track.
Is it?
Is it Subterranean Homesick
Blues? Yeah.
And he's holding it. So there's loads of animation of this owl, just like all done in 3D, really brilliantly animated, just like putting these cards down and dropping and going through loads of the credits, and we're going to recreate it, but not enough people got it, so that fell by the wayside. But yeah, there's the owls play a lot in there, a lot of color, a lot of fun.
So let's move on to the next piece, which is decidedly less colorful, more stark, black and white, a lot more graphic. We've got Last of Us coming up. Can you tell us a bit about this? This is for a game, correct? Yeah, so video games don't traditionally have title sequences, and those that do are usually like techie, like industrial things where the animators on the games just have some fun with it. And Sony America in San Diego have this great department down there, very creative, and they're always looking to do new stuff. So I went down to help them out and start to kind of build title sequences as an outlet for an extra source of creativity in the games. And The Last of Us, I walked into it a couple of years ago not knowing anything of the game, and saw the first few like clips of it and was blown away by the backstory, taking from this disease that ants have, and like in real life there's this disease that ants catch in the rainforest, where they're infected by a spore from a fungus that infects their brain. It's disgusting, and then sends them mad, and then they climb up above their nest, and then it explode, and it sends spores down across their nest and infects everybody. And it's this kind of, and so this was the concept for the game, that it then goes to humans, which sounds like a very B-movie thing, but they added in the father and this girl that he's saving story into it, which makes it really really heartbreaking. And so the brief was, let's have a little bit of that kind of zombie title sequence feel, have a little bit of the
of that sense of mystery. Great score by Gustavo Santonella, who did, if you've ever seen The End of the Motorcycle Diaries, it's really great score moments. And so it was like exploring the spores and how they infect everything. It's incredibly lo-fi, and after watching Rango, it's like there's barely anything, but just to say, it's all done practically. Not apart from the very last moment, there's not a shot of CG in it.
Okay, so let's run this clip and we'll talk about the practical elements afterwards, because there's some pretty fascinating ones. So tell us, how was this made?
So as I said at the beginning, it was all done practically, and it was me and Kevin Jolson, who's down at Sony in San Diego, and Aaron Green, who runs the creative division down there. And I headed down with a shopping list, and we had on that shopping list meats, cheeses, inks, milks, oils, papers, pipette, like every kind of weird thing you could come up with, sponges, every different thing you could buy in any that create interesting textures. And we sat there and we had a really great macro lens, red camera, and just started shooting stuff. And it was, okay, well, let's drop that on that and see what happens. Oh, that doesn't work, that looks shit, let's move on. Let's put this in that. No, it doesn't work. And it really is kind of, let's just play around. And then you get to the point where you're like, shit, none of this is going to work at all. And I'd remembered I had done a project for another video game, which the video game never got released, called Until Dawn, and built a typeface out of using ice. And the technique that I used was using this kind of household like novelty spray, and it never worked. It never created this ice typeface until I was walking upstairs, and then halfway upstairs it suddenly changed and created this ice typeface. And I was looking around going, what the hell's happened? And realized I was just below an air conditioning vent, and realized it was the cold air had just changed it. And that's why it kind of, it was on glass. And so that's why, like, when you put it on the outside of your house, as I imagine everybody puts novelty Christmas ice spray on their house, it changed to create this like really beautiful intricate typeface. So I used compressed air from that point onwards, like to basically initiate that change. And so shooting on glass, painted a stencil for the typeface, really big letters, and then sprayed the compressed air, and it activates in real time this ice creeping along it. And I thought, what if I could use that technique here? So we soaked sponges in black ink and then used the compressed air to freeze it. And then with the macro lens, high speed, you're basically watching 3 different effects, or two and a half different effects. And the majority of it is a sponge, a common household sponge, being frozen, soaked in black ink, frosting and defrosting, expanding, contracting. You get these crystals that form up, and they look like these spore elements. And it really was just a kind of just luck that it matches that thing, but it really does feel like that macro world. And then the beginning of it, we used real fungal mold growths that were done in time lapse. So it has a kind of combination of disgusting practical effects.
I love it. You've plumbed the depths of disgusting effects.
Yeah.
Okay, let's move to the next piece, which is one I'm sure everyone is well acquainted with. It's the opening sequence for The Walking Dead. This was from the first 2 seasons, you said?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you were asked of with this one?
Yeah, so it came in, and I was at Prologue at the time, and it was the project that was hanging around, and everybody at Prologue, and myself included, it's like, we want to work on film titles. It's going to be great. But so this project was hanging around for a long time, and nobody really wanted to work on it. And it sounds bizarre at the time, knowing how great and popular the show is now. Nobody really wanted to work on it, and that's the most bizarre thing to say now. And it had gone through several different revisions. There's an earlier title sequence with blood dropped on the floor, like really dirty brown red blood dropped on the floor, and a foot, like a zombie foot, smudging it through the floor, and then you end up finding the titles in these smudges of blood. And they were done by a colleague, and it kept on getting kind of revisited, and Frank Darabont was never loving it. And then at the last minute, Kyle asked myself and Danny Yunt to kind of pitch in right at the last minute, and I put forward this kind of empty world. There's a photographer that I'd seen had taken these great images of empty cities, and I thought, well, what if we kind of showcase that? And so we built a combination of that with some tight details, and it created this really nicely toned, for the show, evocative feel of that kind of, you feel connected to it because it's got family pictures and stuff like that. You've got this nice connection to it, so it doesn't feel that distant. But the emptiness of it, you can really understand what's happened there before. And I think what was nice about it is, in just a 30-second or I can't remember, 45-second sequence, it tells you everything that's happened to the world. So you don't need to know anymore. You don't need to hear all the other kind of news reports or anything like that. So that was the kind of, the brief was, I think from Frank, was show us different things, and then the end was like, okay, I really didn't like that, so now let's try something completely new. And at the last minute came in with the concept, and this is what we're looking at.
Okay, let's roll that clip, please. That reminds me of Sunday night. Before we talk a little bit about the difference with TV and film, you shared an interesting little insight that you almost ended up in that piece, didn't you? Yeah,
so the picture with the character, John Bernthal's character, me and the animator photographed ourselves dressed as cops, and we put ourselves on the wall behind, and then right at the last minute they spotted it. And so they punched in really tight to crop us out. We thought, you know what, we'll have some fun. There's a lot of, I think it's one of the things I think every designer does in some way at some point in their career, like, let's embed a little thing in there, like put your initials in somewhere, or just, you know, so you can sit there and like smart. And every video game designer does it, and
the Hitchcock effect.
The Hitchcock effect, but with, you know, smaller little things. And it was a fun one. We actually set up a photo shoot. We rented police costumes. We got an American flag, draped it behind us, and but neither of us really looked like cops. It was there's a weird, like, I don't know what it is, but we didn't look like cops. Perhaps a bit too much facial hair, and so yeah, we got through a few revisions, and then right at the last minute they spotted it. And then the other thing, which was cut a lot earlier on, was we flipped the American flag upside down by the police station, and that freaked them out. It's like,
yeah, they don't like that.
Don't get in the way of an American and his flag. I'm only saying that because I'm in Canada.
A Brit in Canada, so you're even more absolved.
I do have to go back to America, so I'm now, I do have to be careful. But that was, and understandably, it's like an incendiary kind of, it means distress in a big way. And I looked at it in a kind of light-hearted way of, apparently it's the same thing with the British flag, but I don't think anyone could tell whether that was upside down or the right way up. So there was some things that we were kind of mulling on, and that because it's that sequence, even though it was like last minute, with all the sequences, it's like you're sat on a project, you're deep into it, let's have some fun with it, let's like find moments to build extra elements. And I think I've continued that into some of my commercials and filmmaking as well, like embed some secrets so that people can pick up on it the second, third, fourth time.
Sure.
Especially with a TV title sequence, because you're watching it week in, week out.
Well, I mean, it's interesting that you say that nobody wanted this project, which in hindsight seems like a ridiculous decision, or for you a very fortuitous decision. Tell us a little bit about the difference between film and television titles. I mean, you created the aesthetic for this show, which continues to this day, which is pretty significant.
Yeah, well, I don't think any of us, there was like 3 of us who worked on it, and none of us understood that. None of us understood. I mean, you look at a film, and I think it's only afterwards that you realize that film title sequences are great, fantastic at kind of telling a bigger story, and TV title sequences do have a lot of problems. You've got a lot of hoops to jump through. You've got a lot of networks and loads of people who have to approve it, far more than the film. And so quite often you can there's some great ideas that can never get off the page. With the film titles, you watch it once. You maybe see the film once. Then you maybe rent it out and watch it again at home, maybe. But with a TV, you're watching it every week, and you're watching it in box sets. I mean, I know when I hear those opening kind of few beats of the Mad Men theme tune and see those first few frames, I know I'm geared up I know what it is. I've seen the title sequence enough. I don't skip past it. I mean, there are some terrible ones, like the Breaking Bad title sequence is just terrible. And it's like offensive to the point of like, come on, just spend a little bit of money and just do that. You know, that smoke effect was bad, and you think there's so much potential there. And I'm sure people have made like fan-made like really great sequences. And there was a fan-made Walking Dead sequence, which was fantastic, all animated, based on the comic book, which was shown around the office. And Frank Darabont was like, I don't want anything like this. And it was really great. And it was I think the guy might have ended up being hired by Kyle Cooper at some point. But yeah, there is you realize that TV title sequences have this more presence, and they're more part of your life. And so I think the attraction, you know, everybody knows the True Detective sequence, and everybody, you know, it's a really great sequence. And yet if that was in a film, you may not know about it. Mm-hmm. And you might kind of pick up on it. There's some really great film title sequence websites. And I think the TV landscape is really fascinating for title sequence work. And since True Detective, just like the world has exploded. Like everybody's asking for title sequences. Mm-hmm. You know, Amazon, Netflix, you know, ABC, which have never done title sequences in a big way before, are now wanting title sequence because it sets up a mood. It puts you in the realm of the show. So. I think it's an exciting time for TV title sequences and video games too, because they're both not new worlds, but they're worlds which are going to rapidly expand and until the budgets shrink. I mean, they're already pretty tight, but
enjoy it while it lasts.
Enjoy it. Well, the Last of Us was done for $5,000.
Oh wow!
The whole sequence, and film budgets are considerably larger, but there still is everything compressing. Mm-hmm. And it really is. It's a moment like you do it because you really want to like be part of that journey or tell part of that story. And I think the same with TV stuff. You're really, you know, fall in love with the project, and that's why you do it, because the big budget monies have gone. So now it's more about, and that kind of gives you a little bit of extra freedom, because they're like, well, we know we haven't got the money to spend, so.
Right, it's the quid pro quo, isn't it?
Exactly.
Creative freedom. Okay, so for the next piece, I guess as a matter of segue, I guess I could use blood. We go from The Walking Dead, which is, I guess the title doesn't have a lot of blood in it, but we now go to Fright Night, where there's a considerable amount of blood in this piece.
So this came about as a kind of the sequence we're going to show a bit later, for Sherlock Holmes, which led to a lot of different projects. Fright Night came about as a kind of, let's try and make a 3D version of that. Of course, we're not going to watch it in 3D, but it looks insane in 3D. And I think it was like one of the first 3D graphic title sequences. And it was really meant as a... again, it sounds like this is my theme of like, it was done in the last minute. But yeah, it was done with Craig Gillespie, who's again like Gore and like Rupert, commercial directors who've moved into film. And he wanted, initially we were pitching this kind of emberish smoke stuff moving through, handmade typography, and the typography was all done scratched with like ink in bits of wood and paper. And he never fell in love with it. I kept on pitching it like every week. Going, what about this again? No. And in the end, he was like, you know what? I want to kind of show moments from the film. I've got this track that is fun, which I think it's a really fun, like greatly, very well paced track for a title sequence. And I want to kind of explode blood all over the place. So it was a bit kind of intense, but certainly a fun one to work on when you're kind of recapping some of the moments from the film. And then, you know, everything was kind of put together with a lot of blood. And the blood,
and in 3D, was
the
it
blood
not?
It was a weird process. It was all hand drawn and then turned into 3D explosions. So it's a kind of nice process of working with that.
Right, and we should mention this is an end sequence.
This is an end sequence, yeah. And if anyone's seen the film, yeah, you'll know it. But I don't think it got a wide release Friday night, but it's a fun end sequence.
Okay, let's roll that clip, please. I do love the juxtaposition of the images in the song. It's quite excellent.
Well, there's a lot of moments in there where, and again with Sherlock, did the same thing where deliberate choices were made for the imagery. So the costume designer, he's scratching his crotch because it's so uncomfortable. The outfit he's in, special effects makeup revealing all the special effects supervisor revealing all the like instruments there, and there's a lot of different kind of deliberate choices made. The editor is the arm getting chopped off, and those were again, you look for moments to kind of build some extra storytelling in there.
Sure. So on the topic of Sherlock, we'll show this piece next. This was one of your earlier pieces, and you've said that this has informed a lot of the work that we've already seen and a lot of your other work. Can you briefly set this up for us?
Yeah, so Sherlock Holmes, again, had the same kind of thing as Walking Dead. There was a few really good sequences, kind of almost completely done, that have been done by Danny Yunt, and they were fantastic. And I kind of might almost prefer some of them to the final thing. There's some really nice things with bullets and hand-drawn stuff. And in the end, Guy was very insistent. He wanted something which was a little more kind of contextual, a little more of the period, recapping some of the moments. And so at the last minute, I mean, the whole sequence was done in 2.5 weeks. It was me and another designer called Simon Clowes who designed it all. Danny did the opening. Me and Simon did the end. And we designed, you know, we wanted to kind of, you know, we've seen ink transitions been done before, and so we had an animator who came in fresh from college. He'd never done like any kind of proper animated work before. We sat him down and he was almost fired on the first day because his computer didn't work and no one believed him. And then it sucks. We gave him one more shot, and he was the kind of the main body behind the kind of animation style. Like, we layered a lot of stuff up. We like plugged in a load of like extra little details in there, putting layer upon layer of ink, you know, some practical ink, some generated, and then got a calligrapher on board. Initially, I'd built all the typography using actual letters from the film, and we then hired a calligrapher to recreate it, but they were too perfect, the calligrapher's work,
as one would expect of a calligrapher.
And so telling someone to do it less good and kind of, or just shake your arm as you're doing it, and so you end up with this kind of messy, scratchy, and much more, I don't know what it was with the kind of Victorian period, whether people did have like constantly had the shakes or something, because the handwriting does seem to evoke that kind of like rough, not like perfectly scripted stuff. So they managed to like capture that, and there was a 3D heads-up design guy who did a lot, a guy called Jorge Almeida, who did a lot of the heads-up display design work for Iron Man, and we needed an illustrator. And he goes, well, I do this night class in illustration. I'll show you some of my illustrations. And we looked at them, and there was just like amazing illustrations. We thought, have a go at this. Try drawing some of these characters. And he did a couple. The initial boards that I'd done were stills from the film, treated with like etching treatments, to like drawn with lots of lines to make them look like etching plates. And so we used a bit of that and then overlaid his drawing on top of it. And he captured, it's very difficult to capture likenesses in illustration, and he did it really well. And so it was a very small team. Me, Simon, and animator Alistair, and Jorge, and we pulled together a sequence in a couple of weeks that nearly killed us, but at the end result led on to a lot of these other projects. Because of Sherlock Holmes, Ridley Scott got in contact and wanted something similar to work with on Robin Hood, and I worked with him on that. And then from that it was London Boulevard, Rango, and it all kind of snowballed up. But yeah, so it all stems down to Sherlock.
Okay, well, let's take a look at that piece. So you mentioned that piece led to work at some point to a film, London Boulevard. We're going to show that piece next. Can you tell us a bit about this one?
Well, London Boulevard.
Yes.
So London Boulevard it's actually remarkably simple in comparison to the others. And what I loved about the brief on that one was, let's go back to the 60s. It's a gangster film. And so it was able to kind of tap into the title sequences that I loved watching, the Thomas Crown Affair, Bullet, stuff like that. So it had a really good Yardbirds score, and it was about just setting up the world of this kind of gangster film that I don't know if it was released in America or Canada. It's a very small film. It's fun. It's actually remarkably good, done by the writer of Kingdom of Heaven. That's why Ridley passed on details. So it's all this small network in LA of people passing on details to each other, and
you did a lot of this is very, very hands-on for this piece, isn't it?
It's very like everything was like hand painted, and I think we're watching the opening titles, which is a little bit more kind of graphical shapes, because the end titles is just like the series of cards, which are fantastic, like just absolutely hand painted, every single bit of it, over a weekend. Just sat in an apartment with a load of colours from Home Depot, and just painting just card after card for everybody and hoping that the spelling was right.
All right, let's show that piece if you wouldn't mind. So we need to get to the Q&A, and we have one last piece that I'd like to show because it is different from the other work, and this is for the Academy Awards. So could you just like really briefly let us know kind of what's going on with this piece?
Yeah, so it really is a very much a kind of left turn with regards to all the kind of different title sequences. And this, I've been working on the Oscars for a number of years now, and gradually I've like whittled down and pushed for, in the past few years, pushed for them to really take these nomination packages in a new direction. And in combination with Lee Lodge, who's the producer, he enabled, and we got into the position where we were able to show like the best adapted screenplay now no longer is just a clip package. It's scripts that have been like cut out and scanned in, and this was the first year where Best Picture was allowed to be taken away from clips from the film. And so in the last, again, my whole thing in the last minute, produced in a few days, 3 days total turnaround, a sequence where the concept was, how can we boil down all the nominated films into one image, and I love those graphic posters, the kind of Ollie Moss style posters, and how can you boil down a film into one image, and then let's go on a journey through that. And so what the ambition is that in future years with the Oscars, that each of the categories has their own little film, with the dream that the Oscars is a great outlet for American and global film talent, but let's try and get some graphic stuff in there as well. Let's showcase some, like maybe there's 20 different graphic designers each doing a little film that tells a story. I mean, it's a great little outlet. So last year there was Buck were involved and Elastic were involved, and maybe it will expand a bit further. So Buck, Elastic, The Mill, myself, and I think that's where we're going to start to kind of get more and more. So it's looking at now, it's like it's rough around the edges in so fact it was done pretty quickly, and I'd like to have a little more kind of texture and integration in it. But I think all I'd say is, I mean, no disrespect to American Hustle in the way that I bottled their film down to 5 hairstyles. That was my read of the film, was that American Hustle is just 5 haircuts. And so that was my decision for like how we went about the American Hustle frame.
Wolf of Wall Street was a good one too.
Wolf of Wall Street, I'm surprised ever made it to air. It's a line of cocaine being cut in the shape of the stock market crash, and I don't think anyone really spotted it or paid any attention. But have a look and
let's see if you can spot it. So let's play that clip, please.
Yeah, the idea was each one of them had their own little kind of flavor. Like, personally, my favorite is Philomena, like scratching out the kid's eyes and having all those bits of information are actually the kind of adoption charts and pieces that are put in the background, and so each one was meant to kind of evoke the film, feel like a kind of more like a poster that you might get, and then bring them to life, which is something that doesn't happen, certainly not in the Oscars.
For sure. So we've got an opportunity for questions. So I cannot see you very well. So I'm going to give the responsibility to you to make sure that you find this person with the flashing light and have a microphone. Thank you.
I had a further question about The Last of Us, specifically the 90-second to 2-minute version of the opening sequence, which plays between the prologue and the first act. I mean, Neil Druckmann mentioned in his commentary that the longer version of the title sequence is added like relatively late into the production, sort of like as a cooling down period between the absolutely heartbreaking end of the prologue. I mean, was there ever a sense of, in terms of how you directed or created that, knowing that there was a very real possibility that millions of gamers would be just sobbing to their controllers at that point, not really paying attention to it?
Yeah, I mean, the irony of ironies is it was so under wraps, that opening prologue, and the opening prologue, in case anyone hasn't played the game, is heartbreaking. I mean, it's better than most film opening sequences, like in terms of the dynamic of it. And so we didn't really have a flavor of, well, I certainly didn't, as some of the Sony guys did, of what we were kind of coming from. And so seeing it in context, I'm so glad that it kind of plays out in the way it does. I'd probably go for a little longer now seeing it in context, but it wasn't something conscious from my side.
Microphones right here. We've got some questions here.
Hi, I'm really curious what the relationship is with the music that's chosen, and whether you can ever influence the music that's chosen at the end. If you do an end.
Sometimes. So The Walking Dead was cut to a completely different track. And I think there's an interesting thing that editors use. A lot of editors will put a metronome on their desk, and they'll tick it to get like a 4/4/4 beat, because then you can cut anything to it. And the intention with a lot of the title sequences is find an evocative track, because quite often it hasn't been scored. Like Hans Zimmer with Sherlock Holmes had not scored anything for that sequence. Initially, the whole sequence was cut to Arctic Monkeys. All these people are vampires, and it was great, and it worked great. And then the editor cut a version to Hall & Oates' Private Eyes, which was hilarious. But yeah, the music, and it's a great question. The music is a really fundamental part, and it's often a kind of battle you have. Snow White and the Huntsman, Florence and the Machine nearly had a meltdown apparently when she saw the cut that I'd done of her track. Cut out this big chunk in the middle and just like, oh well, I want to get to the end quicker, so let's put it there. And instead she had a meltdown, and it went back to the original cut, which was her song playing out for 18 minutes or whatever she did. And then Fright Night, Craig had that song from the outset. I think it's a great fun, like really easy to edit to, that track. And Walking Dead was cut to a different track, as I've already mentioned. London Boulevard, there was a track already existing. But yeah, it is. It's a dialogue with the directors. It's like if they don't have anything, you get to kind of push something, at the very least influence the composer's work. But Gustavo for The Last of Us was on board, and there's no way I'm not going to mess with his work.
When you get hired for a project and you're collaborating with other artists, do you typically storyboard your ideas, or do you kind of just like go shopping, get a bunch of stuff, and jump right into it?
I love the idea that to go shopping, I'd love to find that design supermarket. We're just wandering around with the trolley, and just I'll have a bit of that ink and a bit. No, it goes straight into, and that's like an interesting difference between America and the UK. And actually, I think one of my colleagues from Why Not's here, and we were discussing last night about how in the UK you can get away with like a written concept and a drawing on a napkin and presenting it, and them going, wow, well, I loved your work before, so that's going to be great. Whereas in America, and I'm not sure about Canada, but it's show us the final thing. So and I'll be going through and showing some of them tomorrow, but the initial frames for Sherlock Holmes are identical. The initial frames for Rango are identical. Walking Dead got more treated, but they're almost identical. London Boulevard, identical. Like it really is. It's a case of you go straight into storyboards, and where working at Prologue, you have to do it quickly. You've got the clock is ticking. The other thing with Prologue is everybody in the company is pitching on it as well. So it's like it's a design fight club. Let's see. Although I've just talked about it, but
I can see you broke the rule.
I broke the rule, but you pitch on it, and and then you kind of go for broke, and you have to put it forward in a way that the way that the director can visualize it and see it and go, I feel safe, and it's and their producers feel safe that what they're going to get is what you've just presented.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, I'm a huge admirer of your work that you've done with The Last of Us and XCOM in the video game industry, and I wondered if you could speak a little bit more about how you ended up finding yourself in the midst of working for projects in the video game industry, and what advice would you have for someone who wants to do something similar?
The video game world, I'm a kind of passive gamer. I love games, but they have to really find me. Like The Last of Us, I had no understanding of. I wasn't following a lot of the world, but my first experience with video games was working on Until Dawn, as doing the titles and building the opening sequence, and the brief was create a graphic sequence which sets up the world of this kind of horror survival horror, and went down to Argentina, shot it, because I convinced Sony that it would be great to do a live action version and not make a graphic thing. And again, with another job I did afterwards for Resistance 3, I did the same thing. They came in, they wanted 300 style graphics, and I pitched them back live action, and they went with it, and I'm very, very happy they did. But yeah, the way in, I think, is the good thing about the video game world is they're obsessed with design. So all the people in the video game all my like friends who work in the video game, they love the design world. So I think it's like filmmaking. Sit yourself in the graphic design world and just like keep working, make stuff on the side, like fan made stuff. They'll be more on the ball than most graphic design or film people, because they really tap into like, oh, what's cool, what's going on, like what work is going to really excite me. And yeah, they're following every blog, every feed, all my friends who work in that world they know more stuff about what's going on in the design world than I do. So I think I frequently get links from them saying, have a look at this is a new sequence that was done by a fan for this thing, and we're thinking of hiring this guy. And so I think there's the way in. You don't have to be with a company if you're going to spend some time. You just need a lot of time and a lot of time and
and a little more time.
Yeah, and a little more time.
Do they sell that at the design grocery store?
If they did, I've never found that aisle. Yeah.
Okay, so we have time for one more question. Okay, we've got one here.
Hi there. You touched on having to pitch sort of in America, so your sort of final concept and doing a lot of that work in that it's fully realized and can you just speak to how that reflects sort of work that you're doing almost on spec? I mean, these things you've already been paid for, so you're just presenting an idea, or is it more that you're doing this work with the expectation that there's the possibility of payment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough one. I mean, I found, I've worked with Elastic, The Mill, Prologue in the capacities like coming in to help out on projects and with Why Not, but so it's a slightly different world to my own, where endless spec pitches. But say something like Sherlock, that would have been worked on the company's dime for months and months and months, and then it was just at the end that I kind of stepped in with Simon to really bring it to life. But yeah, it is a weird world to pitch on something in 24 hours and then spend a month working on the 24-hour piece of work. Whereas in the UK, you'll think of an idea in 24 hours and then spend a couple of weeks working that up and like finding things that work and don't work. I have to say, the American way does work, but it doesn't lead to a lot of heavy conceptual thinking at times. And I think there's sometimes a difference where you really want to kind of, let's push the boundaries like with technology or push the format and the process. And I've seen there's rare occasions where you're like, okay, let's involve a new technology or a new technique. But those are the things that's what I look for in a project that I really enjoy, seeing a new technique. Like True Detective did it with the 3D modeling, things that didn't need to be 3D modeled, and then being able to kind of move around things in a new way, because we've seen the technique but we hadn't seen it done to that degree, and I think that's what I kind of miss from the kind of the pitching style that exists right now. Is you get a fast-paced pitch, you go for it, and then you're stuck with whatever you do, which so you have to try and make it the best you can, because that it will kind of get tweaked and changed, but it will always stand around that central core, whatever you work on. Great.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your work with us today.
Oh, thank you.
Let's give a round of applause, please. And thank all of you for coming today. We appreciate it. Cheers.
Thank you.